The outside world, I am nobody. I clock in, I clock out, I smell like bleach and dish soap, and I drive a 10-year-old Honda Civic with a dent on the passenger door that I keep meaning to fix. To my family, I am the daughter who never figured it out, the one who dropped out of her MBA program, who turned down the marketing job my father's college buddy offered her, who, at 31, still can't explain what she does for a living in a way that makes anyone at the dinner table nod with satisfaction. What they don't know is that I work for the Drug Enforcement Administration, and I have for 6 years. I'm not a desk analyst. I'm not someone who processes paperwork in a cubicle in downtown DC. I run operations. I go in. I've spent 8 months of my life as someone else. Different name, different hair, different story. Living inside organizations that traffic fentanyl across state lines, waiting for the exact right moment to pull the thread that unravels everything. The kind of work that if you talk about it at the wrong dinner table gets people killed. So I don't talk about it. My cover, the one I've maintained with my family for the past 4 years, is that I work part-time at a laundromat in Raleigh and pick up freelance bookkeeping gigs when I can find them. It's boring enough that no one asks follow-up questions. My mother wrinkles her nose when she says it. My father doesn't say anything, which is its own kind of verdict, and my older brother Marcus treats it like a punchline he's been waiting to use ever since I turned down that marketing job. That's the version of me they've decided to keep. I want to be clear about something before I get into what happened at my brother's wedding. I am not a victim. I made choices. I chose this career knowing what it would cost me, knowing I would have to let people believe something smaller about me than what was true. There were a dozen moments over 6 years where I could have sat my mother down and said, "Mom, I need to tell you something, but you cannot repeat it to anyone." I chose not to. Partly for security reasons, mostly because I have convinced myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need them to understand, that their approval was something I had quietly stopped requiring. I was wrong about that last part. I found that out in September. Marcus got engaged 2 years ago to a woman named Diane. Diane is lovely. She's an orthodontist in Charlotte. Her family has money, not generational wealth, but the comfortable, tasteful kind that shows up in the way her mother sets a table and the way her father talks about his investment portfolio without ever sounding like he's bragging. When Marcus brought her home for the first time, I watched my parents straighten up in a way I hadn't seen in years. My mother wore earrings, my father used cloth napkins. The wedding was in Asheville. The venue was a renovated barn on a ridge with a view of the mountains that, even I had to admit, was almost aggressively beautiful. My mother called me 6 weeks before the ceremony. "I need you to wear the champagne dress," she said, "the one from Aunt Carol's retirement party." I told her I didn't own that dress anymore. "Then buy something similar." A pause. "Something nice, Jordan. Diane's family is going to be there." I knew what she meant. She meant don't embarrass us. She meant I know how you usually look, and I need you to look like someone who has her life together. She meant a dozen things she didn't say, tucked inside the word nice. I bought a navy dress, simple, well-fitted, appropriate. Not the champagne dress, but close enough that I thought it might satisfy her. It did not. When I arrived at the venue 2 hours before the ceremony to help with setup, my mother took one look at me and pulled me aside behind the cocktail hour tent. "That's dark," she said. "It's navy. For a wedding in September?" She shook her head. "I told you champagne." "Mom, I don't. Marcus's mother-in-law is wearing ivory. I'm wearing blush. You're going to look like you're going to a funeral." There was a dress in the bridesmaid suite that one of Diane's cousins had left behind, a backup coral pink with a bow at the waist that I am going to describe charitably as festive. It was 2 sizes too big. My mother pinned the back with safety pins from her emergency kit and told me I looked beautiful. I looked like a centerpiece. I wore it because I loved my brother, and because some fights are not worth having in a parking lot 2 hours before a wedding ceremony. The reception was held in the main barn, string lights everywhere, long farm tables. The kind of event that photographs beautifully and is only slightly uncomfortable to sit through if you're me. Seated at the family table directly across from my father and next to an uncle who kept asking if I was seeing anyone. Diane's parents sat 2 seats down from my father. Her father, Richard, was the kind of man who shook hands too firmly and maintained eye contact a second longer than necessary. A man who was accustomed to being the most accomplished person in the room. He ran a commercial real estate firm. He had opinions about the economy that he shared without much prompting. Midway through dinner, somewhere between the toasts and the first dance, the conversation turned to careers. It happens at every family event, this particular ritual. Someone asked what someone else does, and then everyone recalibrates, shuffling their understanding of the room, deciding who goes up and who goes down. Richard asked my father what his children did. My father smiled the way he does when he's proud of Marcus, and slightly at a loss for words about me. My son is in pharmaceutical sales, he said. He's done very well for himself. He gestured at Marcus, who was laughing with Diane across the room. And my daughter, he paused. I watched him search for the right framing. Jordan does some bookkeeping work. She's been figuring out her path. Richard nodded with the specific courtesy of a man who has already moved on. She runs a laundromat too, my mother added, helpfully. Part-time. I picked up my glass of water. My father laughed, not a cruel laugh, more of a self-deprecating one, the kind that says, I know, what can you do? And said, she's always been the one who marches to her own drummer. She had a job offer in marketing years ago and turned it down. Still don't know why. I turned it down because I had another offer, I said. Everyone looked at me. From who? My father asked. I smiled. It didn't pan out, I said, and took a sip of water. It did pan out. It panned out into 6 years and 2 commendations and an operation that resulted in the seizure of $40 million in narcotics moving through the Southeast Corridor. But that's not something you say at a wedding. Dinner continued. The awkwardness dissolved the way these things do into more wine and the cutting of cake. I danced with my uncle, who asked again about the boyfriend situation. I helped Diane's youngest bridesmaid fix a strap on her dress with a safety pin. I had one left, courtesy of my mother. Marcus found me near the bar around 9 o'clock and put his arm around my shoulders. You good? He asked. I'm great, I said. It's a beautiful wedding. He looked at me for a second longer. Mom told me about the dress thing. Sorry about that. Don't be. It's fine. You do look a little like a present. Marcus, I mean that in the best way. I actually laughed, and for a few minutes standing there with my brother at his wedding, I forgot about dinner and my father's pause and the look on Richard's face when he recalibrated me downward. I just stood there with the person I had grown up with, in a barn in the mountains, watching his new wife dance with her father. My phone buzzed at 9:47. I looked down. It was a DEA-issued number, a contact I will not name. 2 words. Call now. I told Marcus I needed some air. He nodded, already turning back toward the dance floor. I walked out through the side door into the cool September night, around the back of the barn where the catering trucks were parked, and I called back within 40 seconds. The situation, and I can share only the outline of this, even now involved a witness. A protected witness whose location had been compromised. Someone we needed moved quickly to a secondary safe house in a way that required a senior field officer with specific operational clearance to authorize the transit chain in real time. I was the senior field officer on call. I spent 22 minutes on the phone behind a catering truck at my brother's wedding in a coral pink dress with a safety pinned back, authorizing a witness relocation that would later be cited in a federal indictment. I kept my voice low and level. I used language that would mean nothing to anyone who happened to walk past. I did my job. When I came back inside, the cake had been cut. Someone had saved me a piece. My mother gave me a look across the room, the kind that said, "Where did you go?" And I smiled and mouthed sorry and sat back down. The speeches were winding down. My uncle had given his, which was long and sentimental, and received with affection. Marcus's best man had given his, which was funny in the way that best man speeches are always funny. Crowd-tested callbacks, a story from college, a genuine moment at the end that made Diane cry a little. Then, at 10:34 in the evening, the main doors of the barn opened. Not dramatically. No one threw them open. A woman I recognized stepped through first. Agent Reyes, my supervisor, who I had met in person exactly 4 times. She was in a dark suit, her credentials visible on her hip. Behind her, 2 more agents I didn't recognize. And behind them, a man I knew by face from briefings and news coverage, and the one time I had been in the same room with him during a multi-agency meeting in Washington. Thomas Greer, Deputy Administrator of the DEA. He was the second highest ranking official in the entire agency. He was at my brother's wedding because I was at my brother's wedding, because I was the senior officer who had just managed the call, and because there had been a secondary development in the situation that required my physical presence and could not be handled remotely. I found this out later. In the moment, all I knew was that Agent Reyes was walking toward me. The music had stopped. Not all at once. The DJ faded it down slowly, uncertainly, as the room began to register that something unusual was happening. 200 people watched Agent Reyes cross the dance floor. She stopped in front of me. "Agent Carver," she said. Not quietly, not in a way designed to maintain my cover. Because at this point, in this context, there was no operational reason to. "We need you." I stood up. My mother's hand went to her mouth. My father stared. Richard, Diane's father, the man who had recalibrated me downward at dinner 3 hours ago, sat completely still with a fork in his hand. Deputy Administrator Greer stepped forward. I had met him once. He was not a man who made small talk. "Agent Carver," he said, "I'm sorry to interrupt. You managed the Whitfield Transit Authorization tonight?" "Yes, sir. You made the right call. We need your read on the secondary situation before we proceed. It will be brief." He glanced at the room, not self-consciously, just acknowledging the reality of the space. "I apologize for the intrusion," he said to no one in particular, and to everyone. I looked at Marcus. He was staring at me with an expression I had never seen on his face, something between shock and something I can only describe as recognition, like a word he'd been mispronouncing for years, suddenly clicking into place. "Go," he said. Just that. I picked up my clutch from the table. Agent Reyes handed me a jacket. DEA issued, navy, which was darkly funny given the evening's earlier argument, and I put it on over the coral pink dress. I walked out of my brother's wedding with the Deputy Administrator of the Drug Enforcement Administration. Behind me, I heard the barn stay silent for a long moment, then I heard my mother start to cry. Not sad crying, the other kind. The secondary situation was resolved by 1 a.m. I won't say more than that. I drove back to the inn where the family block of rooms was booked and let myself in through the side entrance. I thought everyone would be asleep. My father was sitting in the lobby. He was still in his wedding clothes, the dark suit he bought for the occasion. His tie loosened. He was holding a glass of water and staring at the floor, and when he heard me come in, he looked up. We sat there for a moment, not saying anything. "How long?" he finally said. 6 years. He put the glass down on the side table. The bookkeeping was a cover, the laundromat also a cover. He rubbed his hand over his face. He's 64. He looked his age in that moment, in a way he usually doesn't. "Jordan, you don't have to say anything, Dad. I told Richard you were figuring out your path." His voice had something in it I hadn't heard before. Something that might have been shame. In front of everyone at that table. "I know. You were protecting a federal witness while I was saying that. I know." He was quiet for a long time. Outside, somewhere down the road, something made a sound, a car maybe, or an animal in the trees. Asheville at 1 a.m. is very quiet. I should have asked more questions, he said. Over the years, not about the job, about you. I should have asked more questions about you. It wasn't an apology exactly. My father is not a man who delivers apologies in clean, direct sentences. But it was the truest thing he had said to me in a long time, maybe ever, and I understood it for what it was. You can start now, I said. He nodded once. We sat there in the lobby of that inn for another hour talking, not about the DEA, not about cover stories, but about the years in between, about the marketing job and why I really turned it down, about what my life actually looks like on the days when I'm just myself, about what it costs to carry something alone for so long that you forget what it feels like to put it down. At some point my mother appeared at the top of the stairs in her robe, took one look at us, and came down without a word. She sat next to me on the love seat. She didn't ask questions. She just sat there close enough that our shoulders touched. That was enough. For that night, it was enough. Marcus texted me the next morning while I was drinking coffee on the inn's back porch watching the mountains. So he wrote, "The bookkeeping thing." Yeah, I wrote back. "Richard asked me 3 times last night if you were hiring." I laughed so hard I spilled the coffee. "Tell him the application process is competitive," I wrote. A few seconds passed. "I'm really proud of you," he sent. "For the record, I've always been proud of you. I just didn't know what I was proud of." I put the phone down and looked out at the mountains for a while. There's a version of this story where I'm angry, where I catalogue every dinner table slight, every dismissive pause, every time my father used the phrase figuring out her path like it was a gentle, permanent verdict. I have lived inside that version. It is not a comfortable place to be. The version I keep coming back to is different. It's this: I built something real, in secret, for 6 years. Not for their approval. Not for the moment of revelation. I built it because it mattered to me. Because the work was worth doing. Because somewhere along the way I had decided that what I did in the world was more important than what people thought I did. The moment in the barn, Greer saying my name, Reyes handing me the jacket, the room going quiet, that wasn't the point. I know that sounds strange, given everything, but the point was the 22 minutes behind the catering truck. The point was making the right call in a coral pink dress, with safety pins in the back, with my family 60 feet away, because someone needed me to and I knew how. That's who I am. I just finally stopped being the only one who knew it. I keep thinking about those safety pins. My mother pressed them into the back of that coral dress 2 hours before the ceremony, smoothed the fabric down with both hands, and told me I looked beautiful. She meant it. That's the part that stays with me. She genuinely meant it. She was trying in the only language she had available to her to take care of me, and I stood there and let her because I understood even then that what she didn't know about me wasn't her failure, it was the cost of the life I had chosen. That's the thing about carrying a secret for 6 years. You get very good at separating the wound from the intention. My father pausing before he described my career, that pause wasn't cruelty. It was confusion dressed up as something that looked like dismissal. He didn't know what to do with me, so he made me smaller in the telling. People do that. They file you under whatever category makes the most sense to them and they stop asking questions, and eventually the category becomes the whole story. I let that happen. I want to be honest about that. I had opportunities to complicate the picture. Not to blow my cover, but to be more present as a person, to push back gently, to not disappear so completely into the role of the family's unresolved question. I chose the easier thing, which was silence, and silence has a way of becoming its own kind of consent. They assumed. I didn't correct them. We both participated in the fiction. What I know now, sitting with all of it, is that the work itself never needed their understanding to be real. Every choice I made in the field, every witness protected, every call made under pressure, every moment I held steady when the situation was anything but. That was mine. It existed whether or not my father knew how to describe it at a dinner table. The value of what you build doesn't live in other people's awareness of it. That took me longer to learn than I'd like to admit. But I also think there's something to be said for the discipline it takes to keep showing up, for the work, for the family dinners, for the coral dress with the safety pins, without bitterness rotting the whole thing from the inside. I was not perfect at this. There were years I kept my distance more than I needed to, years where the resentment sat closer to the surface than I let on. Getting through that without letting it harden into something permanent required a kind of daily choice that I don't think I fully recognized as a choice until recently. The night in the lobby with my father, the way my mother came downstairs and just sat next to me, I didn't engineer that. I didn't earn it through any single dramatic moment. I earned it, if that's even the right word, through 6 years of doing the right thing in rooms when no one was watching and no one would ever know. That's the only currency that compounds without losing value. Thomas Greer didn't walk into that barn to validate me. He walked in because the work required it. The fact that my family was there to see it. That Richard sat at that table with a fork in his hand and finally understood what he was looking at. That was just consequence. Cause and effect, playing out on a timeline I didn't control and couldn't have planned. I wore a ridiculous dress. I did my job anyway. Those two things can both be true at the same time and neither one cancels the other out. That's what I keep coming back to. Not the moment the doors opened. The 22 minutes behind the catering truck, in the dark, doing what I was trained to do because someone needed me to. That was always the point.